Hey everyone, this week in my look at Magic decks, we're still with Pauper, and we're going to look at this Esper Aggro deck. This is my version, you may have seen it before, but this is what I came up with. Now the focus of this deck for the spells is going to be Mystical Teachings, and that may be a little shady to some people because there is only one Teachings in the deck, but it does allow for you to grab kill spells, which are really important, and Momentary Blink, which is also a very important element of this deck. Now, Momentary Blink, it lets you remove a creature and it immediately comes back into play. This is great because it allows for dodging spells and abusing coming into play effects. The first one we use, the first creature to abuse this, is going to be the Aven Riftwatcher. Now, we all know this is a nice little flyer. It's a 3 cost and it comes in at 2/3. But the problem is it has Vanishing 3. So that means after 3 turns, it will die. With Momentary Blink, you can abuse this. You can use a blink to reset the counters, although it will suffer from Summoning Sickness once it is blinked, just as an FYI. Now, when it comes into the field, you gain 2 life, so when you blink it, you gain 4 life. There is a really big life gain mechanic to this, and it's good because there's some spells that cost you big life as well. So the other important creature is going to be the Lone Missionary. He gives you 4 life when he comes into play. And when you blink him, it's going to be good for another 4. The 2 of them really are kind of the main life gain engine of this deck. When I play with the Rift Watchers, I usually make sure not to set a stop to automatically count the vanishing, so when it comes to that last one, I can play Blink, or use Mystical Teachings to find a Blink and use it. If you auto that, then you're going to miss it, and it's going to die. And there's nothing that can be done. The next one that has an effect is going to be Skyfisher. Now when he comes into play, you have to return a permanent. That's kind of the drawback for it being a 2 cost 2/3 flyer. But this works well in your favor because it will let you re-abuse the Rift Watcher, reset the counters on that. You can recast the Missionaries, that's another bonus. Muldrifter, Seagate Oracle, all of your come into plays, it lets you reset those. Other things you can use it for is the Serrated Arrows. If you get it down to 1 counter, you can use that last counter and then use the Skyfisher to return it to your hand. And finally, probably the next best thing is going to be the Bogs. They don't always come into graveyard decks, but when you do, the Bog and reusing it is great. A lot of times Mono Black these days is running some graveyard recursion, so it's important to have. So the next one we'll look at is the Seagate Oracle. He comes into play and you look at the top 2 and choose one. It's great, almost tutor. It's a tutor within the top 2 cards, but the effect is still the same. He's a big player, you'll see him a lot in the mono blues as well as the Muldrifter. The 2 of them create really good card advantage. Another thing you can do with the Muldrifter, which is kind of fun, is for the same cost and a requirement of white as well as blue, you can evoke the Muldrifter. So you pay the 3, and he comes into play, and the effects are on the stack to draw 2 cards, and then he's going to die, but you use Blink to reset him, and now he won't die because he was not evoked, but he is entering the battlefield again, so you're drawing 2 additional cards. So with those 2 cards, you use 2, and you're gaining 4. There's some really good, as well as the life gain you get from the Lone Missionary and the Rift Watcher, you get some really good card draw. You get the Deep Analysis here, and that's another big card advantage card for you. The flashback on it is easily paid. Some people may look at the 3 life and you think you get to a point in time where that's a bit hefty fine, but it's not in this deck because you have so much life gain. There are times against especially control decks where I've gone up to 36 life before they even do their first damage to me. Another one is Snuff Out, and this one I actually have been considering recently dropping down Echoing Decay from 4 count to 3 and bringing in a 3rd Snuff Out, because this card is really kind of the MVP kill spell in this deck. Once you get the Swamp into play, you can cast it for 4 life instead of the 4 cost, and it kills anything except for black. So of course you're going to side it out against the mono black matchup, but if you're in any other matchup, it's going to be one of your best kill spells. And again, the 4 life is easily negated because of the Missionaries and the Rift Watcher. So yeah, you may want to consider, if anyone's running this, to bring in that 3rd Snuff Out, because it really has, I think I underestimated it at first, but it really has the power that this deck needs. We run 4 Echoing Decays, and this becomes kind of like a wrath effect for Pauper. You see a lot of small toughness creatures, and they swarm, especially in the aggro decks. So an Echoing Decay, as well as the Nauseous, will act as your wrath for the board. It's always good to clear out. You get, especially the mono blue, if you can sneak out a Nausea, you'll kill off all the little fairies and whatnot. And Echoing Decay will be able to handle the Delvers and pretty much anything mono white has to throw at you. Diabolic Edict, that's just a one-of for tutoring if you need to. Especially in the mono white matchup, if you've cleared the board with Echoing Decay or Nausea, and all that's going to be left from those is going to be the Guardian of the Guild Pact, which has protection from monocolored. So the only way you're going to be able to deal with that is through Serrated Arrows or Diabolic Edict. Something to keep in mind, so when you want to tutor that out, that's that. The one creature I haven't mentioned yet will be the Fume Spitter. It's kind of nice. Again, you're in a format where a lot of the creatures are not very high in toughness, so putting a -1/-1 will be a kill. Other places you can see like the Oracles in mono blue matchup, and you'll take them down to -1 or 0 from counters, and then they won't be able to do their 1 damage, and you may even stall out a game to a win just because they can't actually do damage to you. And they work as a nice 1-drop. The deck may run into mana issues. You would look at it and you say, okay, well, you're sitting here, you have 6 of the Ravnica lands. You brought them in for all 3 colors, and yes, we did. And that might be trouble to you. You're also running 4 each of Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds. That can be trouble as well. The important thing to keep in mind is that you have only a few basic lands. So you want to keep track during games as to how many are in play, or in your graveyard or whatnot. That way you don't bust an Expanse or an Evolving Wilds and search out nothing. The only time you would do that maybe is if you wanted to shuffle your deck. You're looking at, I don't know, for whatever reason, you've decided that you need to shuffle your deck, then you can pop those. Usually keep them in hand as discard or just to bluff, but they will run into issues. Here's your problems. You're looking at 4 lands that will bring tapped into play. 4 lands that will bring tapped into play. Here's another 6 lands here that will be tapped when they come into play, and then 2 bogs are more tapped into play. Now, I know how daunting that looks, and trust me, I've only run into that issue 1 game. So, as bad as it looks, it's not a common occurrence. I know it's a weird thought, but it will not be a common occurrence. The deck is, 24 lands, so you will be able to draw a land that you can bounce, and, so you'll get maybe a turn 1 drop in Fume Spitter if you have a swamp in hand. If not, you will be able to turn 2 put down one of the Ravnica lands, and turn 3 play a basic land to go with it, so you can get one of those 3-cost spells off. It may look a little daunting, and you may think it's a little ridiculous. If I were to change anything, I guess maybe I would drop the Bog down to a 1 count. Mono Black is running it, and if you come into that the green-black version, I guess it's Devil Dog or whatever you call it, with some of the reanimation and the delve effects, then you would want the 2, but it really depends on your meta. Some places you go, you may not run into either of those decks, or the mono black versions you do face will not have the recursion. So you can drop that down to 1. The Terramorphic and the Evolving Wilds, I think they're important. Maybe drop one of them down to 3, but they are important because this is a 3-colored deck with no real other mana fixers. You want to be able to search out the land that you need. If you look at any of my games, my playthroughs, you'll see that it does need the Evolving Wilds and the Terramorphic to really search out those lands. Let's see what else here. The Prohibit. Prohibit, I think, is one of my favorite counters in the format. You find a lot of decks, especially at like tournament level, who run 2-cost spells, and usually the 2-cost spells are the more important ones. It will cover a lot of creatures, it covers a lot of spells. Edicts, if you're facing mono black, almost every kill spell they have is 2 cost. So it fits well in this deck because, unlike Counterspell, it is only 1 blue and 1 colorless. Running Counterspell in this deck may be a bit too heavy because you are not going to always have 2 blue in play. You can search it out, but you may not be able to play it. if you have a turn 2 where you're sitting with an island and a plane in play, and you have a prohibit, you can cast it. Any other game, you would not be able to cast a counterspell. It would just be a dead card in your hand. You can kick this with another 2 colorless to counter anything converted mana cost 4 or less. And at 4 or less, you've pretty much covered every card you're going to see. There are some occasions where decks will be playing bigger spells. The Muldrifters are 5. If you get into the Izzet matchup or anything with the Crusher, he's an 8 cost, so you won't be able to hit those. But if you do come into those, worst comes to worst, you side those out in game 2. But I do like the Prohibit. It's the best counterspell, I think, for this deck. The other ones that have a colorless in the cost will be like Mana Leak, and that's only going to prevent it if they pay 3. Unless they pay 3. So by bringing Prohibit in, it's not giving them an option, it is countering it. Unless they can stop your Prohibit, that spell is not going to go through. So there is that. Now let's take a look. You also have, the Grim Harvest. You can, if you want to make sure you can play around with that, it does have the recover cost. So use things like the Fume Spitters, the Muldrifters. If you evoke those, you will get the recover effect, and you can return Grim Harvest if you really want it back. The other thing is, when the Riftwatcher, when it runs out of Vanishing, that will trigger on your turn, so after your untap phase. Another reason not to auto-yield that, because it'll trigger, it's coming up. When it dies, it will spark the Grim Harvest, and you can try and recur that. And use it to bring back whatever you need at the time. You can side it out in some matchups if you don't think it's working as well. But let's take a look here at the sideboard. Now, some of the sideboard cards are pretty self-explanatory, but we'll go through them all anyways. Crypt Rats, it works as a Wrath effect. Again, like I said earlier, you run into this format a lot of low toughness creatures in the tournament level decks, so being able to put this down and Wrath the board is always a plus. The one thing to keep in mind is that the X damage does have to be used only with black mana. It's not so bad with this deck. You have the 2 Basilicas, you have 2 Aqueducts, and then your basic swamp count is 3. Another tip here, when you use Evolving Wilds or Terramorphic, make sure, unless you need another color, you want to make sure you have an actual swamp on the field. If you do not have an actual swamp on the field, you cannot use the Snuff Out cost for 4 life, and will have to pay the full 4 to use it. The bog as well has black mana, so it shouldn't be so bad using Crypt Rats to wrap the field, but it is something to keep in mind. And if you decide you have to side it in, then you want to search out the swamps more often. Other things about this, it's good in the matchup against any aggro deck. Goblins, mono white aggro especially, those two. It will go through and pull those off. You can bring it in against Affinity. It may be a little too slow. This deck, I don't want to say struggles with Affinity, but it is quite a tough matchup. The Atogs will not die to Echoing Decay. You have to get a hard kill. The Nausea you're going to definitely bring out because they have no real 1 toughness. Even if they use the Adept, you can do other things. Take out the Nausea. It's not going to be necessary, and bring in a more hard kill, such as Doomblade. But the Crypt Rats, it works for any aggro deck you may come across. Alright, so Diabolic Edict. You may want to bring these in against the mono white in place of an Echoing Decay or something. Like I mentioned earlier, it is going to be the only way you're going to be able to deal with the Guardian, who has protection from multicolor. So you may want to bring those in for something, maybe Nausea, depending what kind of white deck they're running. Some of them do not run as many of the 1 cost. The 1 toughness creatures, so Diabolic Edict or Doomblade would be a better choice. You have Dispels in here for the control matchups, mono blue control, and the Izzet control. Hydroblast will work great in the Izzet decks as well, against the Izzet decks as well, because their big kill spell is going to be Rolling Thunder. So when you bring in Hydroblast, you now have a 1 cost counter for it. So if they tap out completely, which they are prone to do, you can use that to stop it. A lot of times, players who are not as aware will do that. They will just see the ending in place, and even if you're down to 5 life, they will tap out all their mana just to show off and get the win. So Hydroblast will cancel that out and kind of screw them over if they don't leave mana open to counter your counter. Other things for that would be negate. You can try and bring that against storm decks or any kind of control deck, spell heavy deck. You want these counterspell packages in place. You may even want to bring these in. I think in the mono blue, or I mean the mono black control, you want to bring out the prohibits and bring in the negates, because the big killer for those is going to be corrupt, and prohibit will not stop corrupt. I will bring those in, and I will hold on to those, as well as the prismatic strand. Those are your two big stoppers for corrupt. Have them in hand, hold them until absolutely necessary, wait for a corrupt. If the corrupt doesn't come and you have to use one, use it, but you want to really hold those for the corrupts. You have enough to kill the creatures and enough draw to deal really with the discard, but the corrupt is going to be the big thing, and you want to hold on to those. You can bring in Doomblades and any kind of aggro heavy matchup. The one thing you have to do, remember in mono black though as well, you're going to have to bring the snuff outs out. So they're not going to hit anything against mono black control. Definitely want to bring in something else, maybe the edicts. Maybe use that spot for the third negate or the prismatic strands, but you can't use the snuff outs against mono black. The other thing is the Doomblades as well. Will not get them there. But yeah, any controlled package, spell heavy package, bring those in. Kind of a tough matchup too, I guess, is going to be the recursion from the Devil Dog, that green-black recursion. Because the black, you cannot hit them with the blades. Some of the creatures are bigger than the 2 toughness, but they have almost no spells. So their only spells are going to be Tortured Existence, and that's not really a game changer. You can bring in counter spells, you can counter it, but I can tell you firsthand they can beat you without it, no problem. So maybe bring in the edicts for that matchup. But the one matchup I think is a little tough is going to be the storm. You can bring in some counter spells for that, but once they know you have counter spells and you're going to be trying to stop that, they're going to wait a little longer to, I guess the term is go off, to start casting their series of spells for the storm, and you may only be adding to their count by trying to counter it. So well, if you check out the later matches, I will go through. There's at least a temporal fissure deck that I will show you the matchup. But yeah, some thoughts if you want to change some other things out. The prohibits can be dropped. You can bring in not just one, but a second snuff out if you play it and you see the power that I was talking about. Some decks only run 1 blink. I definitely think 2 is a better choice because of all the come into play effects. You can bring in more deep analysis if you want more draw. The deck is pretty good on draw though, because you have 3 deep analysis. You also have 3 of the Maul Drifters, and you will be able to get some out with the Seagate Oracle as well. Another thing to keep in mind is Mystical Teachings will almost be better for you come game 2 or 3, because a lot of these spells are instants. So anything you bring in, you're going to be able to tutor up. So it really becomes a great addition to the deck just based off of the matchups. You can use it to find the counter to your opponent. You can also, if you find you don't like Grim Harvest or it's not working enough, you can try and get rid of that as well. It is kind of a situational card, but on the occasion that you do get to use it, it's going to be an extra 4 life, or it's going to be an extra 2 cards drawn. It does have its moments. But the idea with the deck, you really want to keep out the 1 and 2 ofs so that you can get the most out of Teachings when you do draw. So that's that. I think I covered about everything, and I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you guys get a chance to give this deck a try. It's something a little different, but still has the chops to, keep on pace with the competitive decks you'll see in Pauper. I do recommend, if you do want to run this, take a look at some of my other videos as far as this deck is concerned. I think I'll even put together a playlist of the games if you're looking for it, just to get you an idea of the matchups. And also check out the article when it comes up on Pure. There will be a link at the bottom. When it comes published, I will put it out, and you can click on that later to see the whole article. Alright, so check it out, check out those games, and I'll come at you in a week or less with a new deck. Thanks.